Okay, XOmniverse. I see you've kind of gone on to the what I call the emotive libertarian bandwagon. That is, it's not enough to just be a libertarian and say, "Hey, I got my property. I'm going to do what I want to do on my property. I'm not gonna get in your business. I'm not going to intrude on your life. I just want to do my thing, and I'm not going to aggress against others, and that it's not enough to have that. You have to have the right social values. That is, you can't be racist. That is, you cannot be racially exclusive as per your property rights. And this is becoming more and more popular on the YouTubes. Actually, I don't know if it's becoming more and more popular. My guess is, I'm thinking it may just be that more and more people are just coming down on one side or another, whereas before people were more ambiguous in regards to this kind of stuff. But in your example, you're talking about how you would have racially exclusive people who would go off and they would form racially exclusive private property plots. And in these racially exclusive private property plots, they would be racially exclusive. And your argument here is that these people who go into this area will eventually consort with people of other races. Now, races as defined, however they're defined. I don't want to get into that. There are some way, I understand that it's a continuum and there's no, distinct where you say one race ends and one race begins, okay? But yeah, however they say the races, they say don't consort with the races. And let's say you have a bunch of people, you got to get into specifics here. Let's say you have a bunch of people that go off into an area and they acquire property in an area, however property is acquired. That is, you have to build X amount per acre in order to own it, and then they get into some sort of claims association or land club, kind of like what happened in the Wild West. And however they do it, they own property in the eyes of the surrounding society. Now, when doing so, each individual owns a certain amount of property, and so if a person has a private property plot and he, let's say you have a guy and he takes a liking to a Mexican girl, what'll happen? Well, he owns his private property. Obviously, he's not a white nationalist anymore, and this is how white nationalism ends. Is basically a white nationalist guy, falls in love with like a black chick or something. That's basically how. I've never seen a white nationalist become not a white nationalist without, dating someone interracially. That's always how it gets broken. But anyway, and so let's say this happens. Well, what are the other private property holders going to do? Well, this man owns his private property. Now, if they say, well, he broke the racial bond, we have to go in and we have to kill him, we have to string him up, or we have to run him off of that property or something. If they do something like that, well, then they're going to face repercussions from the surrounding society. Now, let's be a little bit more. Now, where I think conflicts are more likely to arise is if you have a bunch of people with the private property, they get together, and then, like, it's the first generation of the white nationalists, and of course the first generation of any movement tend to be a little bit more hard line. They say, okay, let's all make an agreement with each other. What we're going to do, when we sell our property to other people, we are going to have a restrictive covenant. That is, if you want to continue to own this property, you have to behave in a certain manner. That is, you cannot date interracially, have sex interracially, however race is defined. You cannot have sex interracially and still retain ownership of this land. And if you do, then what's going to happen is that this land is going to be seized and you are going to be kicked out. That could be the stipulation of a contract. And let's say you have someone in that area who agrees to that contract, signs that contract, and then proceeds to consort interracially. He would then be in violation of contract. Now, that could then be put forward to a private arbitration agency, and the private arbitration agency could either say that the contract is valid or that the contract is not valid. If the private agency says the contract is not valid and society at large thinks, if the private arbitration agency says the contract is valid but society at large says it's not valid, then society at large could take matters into their own hands and say, no, we're going to allow this person to keep that property, and we are going to force you to remove that stipulation from the contract that he then owns that property. And he is no longer a part, and that property plot no longer has that restrictive buy or sell stipulation. So it's no longer a restrictive covenant. It is just, there are no stipulations to the transfer of that property as per the agreement. And you can go into all sorts of scenarios about how this will work, but if the society at large does not like what is going on, the society at large can engage in reactionary violence. I mean, and it has nothing to do with ethics. It has nothing to do with this is right, this is wrong. No, I mean, they can, there's a three-dimensional space in which we operate. And so this is why I didn't even bother to Laughing Man OX's video to me. Basically because I thought this was just so clearly obvious. But apparently it's not. I mean, XOmniverse is making the same arguments. And like Laughing Man OX is, I thought Laughing Man OX was kind of a dumbass. And I still think he is. Because, he made these videos about how market anarchy fails on public goods, and he brought up some free rider problem or some commons problem, the same trite and long refuted shite. And so then he brought up how private property could lead to exploitation, because and he just brought up the example of a white woman getting impregnated by a black man, and part of the contract could state that she cannot consort interracially, and so she would then be in violation of contract. But that would then go through exactly what I just said to you. XOmniverse, there's a bazillion things that could happen when someone is in violation of a contract. If the contract is not seen as valid by society at large, then it is not seen as valid by society at large, and it will be responded to. Okay, this is not something to be advocated. This is not something I am prescribing. I'm describing how things, I'm not certain how things would shake out, but just going off of what I've read, in stateless orders, this is not something to be worried about. And the worry comes from people who call themselves leftist, and the people who really put this forward. There's a bunch of people who are, grabbing on after they've said it, but it's basically Brain Police and Laughing Man OX, who both fancy themselves men of the left. And this whole leftism thing, it's just how like the man of the left says, I'm for people over profits. I don't want companies, poisoning the water supply or being sneaky in cutting corners in products, like having a computer that after a year becomes dangerous and malfunctional and shoots sparks and stuff. I don't want that happening, and so I'm for people over profits, and that is why I am for not a free market in goods and services. And the same kind of thing is happening, is being played out in this property. You have these people saying, I'm for people over property, right? I don't want private property owners exploiting the people in this property area. I don't want them doing really nasty things, and so we can't have people just doing whatever it is that they want. Because if people are racist, then they could exploit, then they could engage in authoritarian actions, or they could try to exploit people outside of the private property holdings of the white nationalists, or the people who call themselves white nationalists. But it's the free market, and every action has some sort of reaction. And if these white nationalists try to get together and try to form a state which they project legitimacy onto, then they will have all the problems of imposing a state on people outside. Imposing a state on people outside who do not believe in a state. That is, they will have to have a 98% marginal state. And theoretically, if there is enough force, if they have enough firepower, you can do anything. But if they have like Terminators, walking around and like Star Wars weapons, then they may be able to pull it off. But that's ahistorical. That's not something that has happened. States throughout history, like even when Nazi Germany conquered France, that was all fantasy. The Frenchmen viewed the Nazi occupation as legitimate. All right, they didn't like it. All right, viewing a state as legitimate doesn't mean supporting it or liking it. It just means viewing it as, oh, they won the war, they conquered us. But if you have a large population that has a theory of statelessness, that has a theory of the stateless society, and recognizes the state as just an idea, then the white nationalists would have to pacify a population by force alone, without any belief in a state, and that's something that simply does not happen. So, this is all just this is left libertarianism. This is leftist bugaboo. So when they say I'm a left libertarian, I'm more of a leftist type. That's true. That's true. They are leftist in that they have a fear and an opposition to the free market.